Hi everybody, welcome to Sotheby's Institute of Art, New York. And I'm Christy Kuan. I'm the director and CEO, and I'd like to welcome all of you and all of our amazing panelists tonight. We have Helen Tumor, Stas Johnson-Chyzhykov, Elizabeth D, and last but not least, Christy MacLear. So what I thought I would do, we have some people joining us from Facebook, which is why we have the mics so that you can all hear us and people online can hear us. What I thought I would do is just read a little bit about our panelists, and I'm sure all of you have already read their bios online, but just to recap everybody's memory. Elizabeth D. is founder of the Elizabeth D. Gallery and the Independent Art Fair. She is the CEO of Elizabeth D. Gallery in New York and of independent art fairs in New York and Brussels. She's included in the 2015 Art and Auctions Power 100 and has been profiled in many international publications, including the Wall Street Journal, Vogue, and the New York Times. Elizabeth D. graduated in 1995 with a BA from Mount Holyoke College, majoring in studio art and critical social thought, very relevant. And she served as co-director of Viewing Augustine Gallery, New York. She has served on the board of the Sackler Center for Feminist Art at the Brooklyn Museum and currently serves on the board of PIVO in Sao Paulo. So welcome, Elizabeth. Stas, I really wanted to welcome because Stas is a graduate of Sotheby's Institute in New York, and we worked together when Stas was an intern at Artsy and I was working at Artsy. She has just been promoted to Director of Collector Relations at Artsy, the leading global platform for discovering and collecting art. She's a frequent Vogue Ukraine contributor and author of cover stories on Marina Abramovich, Nan Goldin, Vanessa Beecroft, and Olympia Scary. And she's a graduate of Brown University as well. So welcome, Stas. And Christy. Christy is Vice Chairman of Art Agency Partners, a subsidiary of Sotheby's, focused on creating an art advisory practice for artists, estates, and foundations. She's the first CEO of the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation and the founding executive director of the Philip Johnson Glass House. Additionally, she consulted with the CEO of the Cleveland Clinic toward enhanced digital patient experience and global expansion, represented the board of 3 Chicago museums during the relocation of Lakeshore Drive to create a lakefront park, and led strategic planning and partnerships for Disney's Newtown development called Celebration. Christy has a BA from Stanford University and an MBA from Wharton at UPenn, and she serves on the Board of Trustees for Stanford University and is chairman of the board of the Municipal Art Society of New York. Thank you, Christy. So I'm only reading, as you all know, just a little bit of their bio. And last but not least, Helen Tumor is founder of STONELEAF Retreat, and she's co-founder and artistic director of STONELEAF Retreat also. Which is it, founder or co-founder?
Co-founder, because it's me and my husband Eric.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is a connective space and artist residency in the Catskill Mountains of New York. And Helen also teaches at Sotheby's Institute. She's the former director of Pulse Contemporary Art Fair and originated the year-round events initiative Pulse 360. Prior to this, Helen was the director of Collective Design Fair, which she helped launch in New York in 2013. And she used to run her own gallery in the Lower East Side. And Toomer graduated with a bachelor's in fine arts from the Art Institute of Bournemouth, England. So welcome to all of you. And thank you all for coming here tonight for our Women Leaders in the Art Market panel. This is our second one, and I know this is a very hot topic. So what I thought would be really interesting to do is just start off talking about first jobs and sort of your memory of your first job and how you got to where you are now. So I think maybe let's start with Christy. The first job you ever had.
The first job I ever had? Well, the first job I ever had nothing to do with the arts. And I guess my lesson for all of us here is that the first job you ever had doesn't necessarily set the course for your life. And you should always look at your jobs as a series of explorations to understanding what are your best skills. Because I really think it comes down to what do you love and what are your best skills. less about specifically the title of where you work, etc. I worked at a place called Tram Crow. It was right out of school. I was trying to figure out if I wanted to be an architect, or if I wanted to be in the arts, or if I wanted to go into business, and this was just one of those touch points. So that was my first job.
Great. Elizabeth?
Yeah, it was working at a gallery, actually, the Daniel Weinberg Gallery in San Francisco. This was 1995, so I just graduated from college, and I was still practicing artist as well, thinking about going and getting my MFA in sculpture. So I didn't really have a vista, as Christy was saying, I didn't have a vista that the gallery world would be my life. I thought of it as a conducive place to work and learn, and a way to kind of occupy that part of my day so that I would have studio time. And so, I went around to many of the galleries at 49 Geary, which is still a gallery building, and gave my resumes out, and I was still, coming out of college, going to headhunters and being put into corporate, interview jobs, and I thought, this is just so not me. And I walked into Dan's gallery, and I had walked in right as they had fired someone that morning. So it was also a timing thing where they really needed someone desperately, and I was there, and they said, can you hold on 1 second, Dan wants to meet you quickly before you leave, and I was like, oh my God, I wasn't prepared for this, but sure, why not? And so I got the job, and that was the beginning.
Really great. Stas, what was your first job?
My first real job was definitely Artsy. There was sort of like life before Artsy and life after Artsy. This is how I think about it. And it was my real job and my first serious job, I think, because I realized that it could be so much more than a 9-to-5 or 9-to-6, and it became sort of it became my life, and it's been awesome ever since. But leading up to that, I was absolutely convinced I would go into finance or business consulting. I didn't even think that there were other jobs out there. And then, I sort of I took a leap of faith and sort of like a calculated risk, and I took this job, and it's been great. Yeah.
Helen?
My first job, I was a fair assistant, a temporary fair assistant at the Affordable Art Fair in London. And I met the owner of the fair, and I was doing some database work, and I basically told him his database was all wrong, but I could fix it. And sort of like wangled my way into a position full-time at the fair in London, and I've been in and out of fairs ever since, telling people that I can fix things. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
It's true. I think one of the things, most of us in the room have probably had jobs before, and one of the big challenges for many of us is how do you transition from being an employee to a leader? And all of you have been and now are in leadership roles. How did you make that transition? I don't know who wants to go first.
I was a terrible employee.
Why? Why were you a terrible employee?
I just felt that it was. I don't know why. I guess I'm very independent in the way that I work, and I can take something and completely run with it and get completely inside of it, and I kind of have that obsessive work quality, and I think that is really great for being an entrepreneur or running something. It's not necessarily great when you're the assistant, which I had been in this job with Dan, although I still have very fond memories of my time there. But I don't know that, I think when you are especially coming up and working primarily in the art field, it's primarily a general administrative duties. And that's very much about being a good student. And I came into the world, I think, as an artist, so I had a really hard time conforming to that kind of administrative assistant level of the gallery world, although I worked my way up from completely the front desk. And I really value that tradition of apprenticeship that I was lucky enough to have. But I definitely don't think that it's two different parts of the brain in some ways, particularly when you're talking about, at least my experience in gallery work. You're either constructing deals and visualizing an artist's future and working with the strategy, which I love, or you're literally typing the labels for slides, which I had done for years. And I think both things are really essential to bring together, but one tends to be inclined naturally on one side of the fence versus the other, and I just happen to be inclined on that side of the fence.
There's a big difference between management and leadership. So that fulcrum shift that you have, it kind of requires a different skill base. And my story about that moment was when I got my job to be the first director at the Philip Johnson Glass House. And I didn't have the background for that at all. I mean, I had more of a urban design background, and I was like, that's my job. And you'll feel this way. That's my job. They just need to realize that I'm the perfect person for this job. And so, like Helen, I actually decided they don't know this yet, so I'm going to write the business plan for the Philip Johnson Glass House. And they didn't ask me to do that, but I just figured the difference between me waiting for them to call me and me answering their questions, that's a management thing. That's like, go fetch. A leader, and especially for a historic house museum, like, you have to reimagine. And so I figured I'm just going to write that business plan. And if I don't get it, that'll be their loss. But I definitely thought I'm going to go out there and I'm going to be proactive about this. And that's the difference between, I think, a manager and a leader. And it worked. And it worked. So.
Which I also think in the arts sector, a lot of people don't take that initiative to just put together a business plan, because most people in the arts really, it's a very hierarchical structure. A lot of museums, it's really, you kind of don't do anything until you're asked. So it's probably pretty rare. Did they get any other business plan?
I don't think that they did. But I also think that's a real lesson learned. I think anytime I have young staff and they're willing to see what's not been done yet and go out into that realm and be proactive that way, that's a really remarkable staff person.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And for Helen and Stas, I mean, you've been in the same line and you've transitioned from working to running fairs and running the collector relations.
I think this point very much resonated with me, because I find that a good employee is the one that's very good at executing, delivering, is super responsible, and we certainly need these people. And these are important skills to have, especially in the early stages of your career, when you're establishing your work ethic and establishing your profile, your image. But step by step, I think it is paramount to start developing a practice of big picture thinking and ideating, because these are the kinds of things that will get you noticed with your manager, your peers, and so on and so forth. I think it's worth remembering that most of the decisions about your career are made without you in the room. And so it's important for those people that are making the decision to know completely what your strengths are and what your ambitions are, and remember that, that person is not only reliable, but can connect the dots, can bring new ideas, and can be a huge value for the organization in the long run. So I think that's the difference.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you have to have a strong work ethic. You have to work hard. You have to want to progress. You have to take the bull by the horns sometimes. And also, what's kind of amazing about this industry that we're in is that you can carve your own path. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. I mean, there's still jobs out there that I don't even know exist that you guys will invent one day. It's really amazing. That's why I love it. Like, people run their own galleries, their own fairs as artists creating their own work. And personality has a lot to do with it. And I think that people buy into people. And I think that also helps if you're a strong woman. I think that helps too. Or man, strong person.
Strong people,
yeah.
yes. Well, the art market is a multi-billion-dollar industry with new collectors and new technologies changing the market, and the market keeps expanding every year. And you've all been working in the art world for many years. And what has kept you at the top of your game in this very opaque and very challenging industry? I mean, I think a lot of people try to hold leadership positions in the art world and they don't get to do so. How have you sort of held your own in this field?
I think the idea of opacity sort of leads me to the idea that because things are very unclear and under-regulated, let's say, you have to be very flexible and be ready for change. So you're assuming that that means, you know, things could evolve much more quickly because it's actually almost tribal in a way, I think, the art industry. And then the other is just trust. I actually think one of the real fundamentals for me is just do, you know, I say this, just do the right thing. You do the right thing.
Christy's given me a lot of great advice, and every single point you're absolutely right. And I think this challenge of doing the right thing happens at every point in your career where you sort of don't know if you should just take the shortcut or, you know,
or you've got
maybe
people
nobody
who have
will
different
notice.
interests, and you have to always think about what's the right thing for the long run. And if you make good decisions and you have a record of that, I think that that transcends the opacity. That's what I think.
I would say one thing for me I've noticed is the industry is very small. The art world is still a small world. So if you have a reputation for doing the right thing, word gets out. And I think that is part of staying at the top of this very, very opaque and complicated business.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, you're in gallery world, art fair, I mean, all of these things. How do you navigate all of this?
I mean, I think that I was lucky in that I had an opportunity to mentor with a lot of men early on in my career who were supportive. But I also was highly aware that of the gender issue. And so I think I knew that in order to, coming out of women's college education, I think also studying that and making that part of my outlook, I kind of early on knew that whatever I was going to do in this field, I was going to have to, in some ways, create my own job. And I think being a gallerist is a great way for women to do that. Also working with artists and developing, you know, a market for their work, both in terms of institutions and in terms of patronage from private individuals, is a very exciting thing. And I always say, yes, the art market is huge, but it's only as big as individual artists and what's happening with them in the moment and how they can be developed. So I always love the vision behind doing things like that. And the opacity is an issue, and it always will continue to be. I mean, it's very much an orthodoxy of culture, and that will bring up some great things in terms of the tradition that we've been working in, and also some challenges. But I see it ultimately as an opportunity space where, you know, thinking that maybe for my generation feel a little conservative generally is an opportunity to kind of innovate and expand and ask the question of why, you know, and I think that's in any point in one's career and trajectory, that's always a great question of why are we doing this? Why am I been asked to do this? Is there a better way? And is there a way that encompasses a more outwardly facing view to visual culture? And that includes more people and includes more of an audience that might be more sustainable. And I think I've always sort of had that itching question, and I think a lot of us have had that and have tried to kind of implement or just engage a dialogue that has allowed for that.
I think
Stas, I think my question for you has a little bit of an angle there where I think, you know, you started at Artsy and then you rose to director in a short time frame. And it's a very competitive space, the art and technology space. There's a lot of young people from engineering, from the art sector, from the business world trying to break into that space.
Right.
So how did you sort of rise to the top when there's so many competitors and young people who are trying for the same role?
Well, I think I have a couple of answers there. Elizabeth, you brought up tradition, which resonated with me because when I joined the industry, I realized that this industry is very traditional and very complex, and I have huge respect for it. There's a reason why it survived for centuries and has not been touched by technology. And I think when I joined Artsy, there was a lot of excitement around the idea of disrupting the market and changing the industry completely and moving things around. I think what stayed with me is the idea that we're not here, and I'm not here to change this industry. I'm here to help, hopefully make it better, hopefully with my colleagues bring technology that helps art entities do what they do best, which is promote artists. Which is promote and protect artist estates and bring artists new artists to new audiences. So this is sort of like I think this is a very important set of values to be reminded of when you're working in the online art space. And then personally and professionally, it certainly is a competitive space. But I think the difference for me was that on day one when I joined as an intern, I didn't, it wasn't a job for me. I wasn't there for a couple of months and sort of like transition and move to another job. I was there to stay. Artsy wasn't able to offer me a job initially. I had to ask to stay as an intern for much longer, and it was a journey, but I think that the difference was that I was focused on long term. I didn't care for the short-term quick success or quick wins here and there. I was sort of like focused on helping the company succeed in the long run and hopefully grow with it.
That's great. And Helen, I mean, you have been at the top of the art fair world for so long. I mean, we all know you, and you've been in all the press articles and all this coverage that I remember those days just reading all these articles about you and then finally meeting you in person. And now you've started STONELEAF Retreat. So how did you navigate sort of staying on top of a very competitive art fair industry, and then why did you decide to start your own artist residency?
I think it kind of, one of the key words I was thinking about was like a couple of them was like honesty and integrity. Like there's a reason, like I love art, I love working with artists, I love being part of this community. And I think that people respond to that. And so even though this isn't opaque, and it will always, like Elizabeth said, will remain opaque in certain ways, it's still comprised of people who ultimately love art and want to progress. For me, it was just like I worked with art fairs and in art fairs all the way from a fair assistant all the way up. So I know all the different roles, and it helps me appreciate and value sort of seeing the bigger picture and directing more. But ultimately, I missed working directly with artists. So we started an artist residency and a retreat upstate New York. And it's been like a wonderful experience, and it's still very, very new. But I'm kind of like, if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? I'm a bit of a risk taker, and I think that some people, it's so easy to get overwhelmed by like, I have to remain in this position and I have to do this, and I see this a lot with the students that like I teach, and they're like, well, this job, the first job that I get is going to define me forever, and it's not. It's not. Some of the relationships that you'll make now and the relationships that you make in your first internships and your jobs will help you in the future, but what you do doesn't define you, you define you. So I just try to carve out my way, and I'm in a happy spot with the residency right now.
That's great. I want to start off with you, Helen, in terms of, you came from the UK, and if you could talk a little bit about early inspiration, early mentors that really shaped your thinking about the art world? Who was most inspiring?
So it was my first boss, Nikki Wheeler, at the Affordable Art Fair. She scared the crap out of me. I was so nervous. Like, she had this, like, she was very authoritative, but kind. But she taught me so much. Like, she set the parameters. I listened to her. I took criticism, and I grew. And then she would take me to the pub and get me drunk, but I would still we'd still go back the next day, and I'd still respect her and do everything that she asked me to do. So it was more of a professional mentorship, as in terms of like, showing me the art world. It was more kind of like, this is what you need to do in order to do a good job. And then she supported me and praised me when I did a good job, and scolded me when I didn't. So I learned quick.
How about you, Stas?
I think I've been very, very lucky. I've met wonderful people along the way that became my mentors, friends. Christine is obviously one of them. Certainly, my manager and co-founder of Artsy, Sebastian Coolidge, is a major mentor for me. But I also find that mentorship is everything. It's every conversation I have with my colleagues and friends, especially women, because they usually have a very unique perspective. And in the early days of my professional life, it was certainly rather hard to get a mentor. It's something you sort of like acquire gradually. You have to invest in these relationships. You have to be super authentic, but also fairly strategic. But in the first months and years, it was certainly my network of colleagues and friends, which I continue to rely on. I have friends and colleagues to who I come for specific advice when it comes to artwork shipping or advisory, all sorts of things. And I think it is very important to cherish those connections and treat every interaction as a learning experience. Yeah.
That's great advice.
Yeah,
Elizabeth.
I completely agree. I mean, I think you have different kinds of mentorships across your own generation that, almost create a support system or a professional family. And that is, I think, as important as some of your earliest bosses, although I definitely have to say Dan Weinberg was my great mentor, partially just because he had his priorities straight about what it meant to sell an art object, what it meant to represent the artist. We would, if a work of art came in from the studio, no one could answer the phone. We really couldn't even sit at our computers at that time. We had to all go and look at the work and make sure it was okay and talk about its significance. So it was always clear every single day when new works would come in, and we would have to go through that ritual as a team, that we were there for those things and not for anything else. And I think that really taught me sort of a mode of ethics and philosophy about why one is in the profession. But I also think artists have been some of my greatest mentors because they have, especially that generation that Dan Weinberg had represented, like Jeff Koons and Richard Archwager and Sherry Levine and Bryce Martin, Barry LeVay, Terry Winters. That generation really was the first generation to come up where there wasn't an expectation that this would lead to a global marketplace. And so when they found themselves in positions of success, they were incredibly grateful for having that much support at that point in their careers. And I think that there was a lot of attribution to that success to the partnership of the gallery. And the relationship between the gallery and the artist was a very sacred one for them. They were the gatekeepers that protected their creative space and their creative time. And so for me, in some ways, the demonstration of those kinds of ways of thinking were as much an impact for me than having someone to call for advice. It was more the demonstration of, putting some of those ideas into action and being able to witness them, that taught me as much as being able to have, someone on the other line of a phone call that I could call, though that's very important too.
I think I'm just old enough that most of my mentors were men in the beginning. I'm in my young 50s, and most of the people who I worked for were men. I didn't even know how to find a mentor, but I did realize I had one boss who helped me understand how you find a mentor and how you leverage a mentor. And I would say it's even evolved. Like, it used to be about professional development. How do I do something? Can you help me navigate this project towards success? My second phase of mentors were balance, like life balance mentors for me. When I have a 18-year-old son. How do I have a life and have a son and be innovative and be excellent and all these things? And the last one, which I feel like I'm in now, is really about a community. And I feel like I'm in a place where it's really about the women, strong women around me that are part of a community that I draw upon and that provide support and strength. And that's sort of how my mentorship, experience has gone.
That's really great. One of the things Christy said to me about being a leader, and I think this is, not gender specific, is that it's very lonely, because when you're a leader, your employees don't really want to hang out with you. I mean, they're going to go out to the bar without you. And I think one of the things I'd love to talk about is, sort of how you navigate being a leader in today's very competitive climate, and sort of what your education had to do with your getting there, and what are the things that you learned that you didn't learn in school. Because really, I think being a leader, a lot of it is your formal education. I mean, all of you are highly educated, but then a lot of it is also stuff you learned outside of school. So I don't know who wants to start.
I'm happy to start. I love learning. Like every other year, I probably take a course of some sort. I just love learning new things. The other day, I was at a day-long seminar on digital marketing. There were 10 students in class, not a single guy. And to me, it showed, a couple of things. It's amazing to see that women are so ambitious, but also it showed to me that guys feel much more comfortable claiming that they could do digital marketing. They just feel free to dare without getting the education, and this is what I want to see more of amongst us. Daring to say, let me figure this out, I've never done this before, but I'll try a few things and iterate from there, rather than taking the time to learn everything and essentially get a PhD on the subject. So I think looking around here and like in my environment, I see only highly competitive and competent rather women, and my recommendation would be dare to try, even if you have not done something like this before. Just have the guts to try and test your abilities, and you'll learn at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've learned everything on the job. I mean, I did a fine art degree and I was a shocking artist, and not in a good way. And I feel like I've just learned and sort of really like been so fortunate with people that I've been able to work with to kind of get to this point. And I think there's so much to be said from experience, which is why we always talk about like internships for students and networking, because like that's how you grow your community and your support network. You support others, they will support you. You can't expect to put on a fair if you haven't been to your friends' events. It's like it takes time, and it's like hard work. I know I went off the point then, but
it is hard work.
It's hard work, yeah. And it's 24/7. This industry isn't 9 to 5. If you want 9 to 5, go work at Michael's. Otherwise, this is not for you.
Yeah, and also I would say, you know, it's not about sitting in front of the computer. You know, it's about working with people and building relationships, and that's what you're there to do. It doesn't matter what you're there, if you're there just one day a week to intern, it's still so much about, am I connecting with the person that I'm working with, and what are their needs, and can I anticipate that, and can I engage a conversation that helps me learn and helps me grow in what I'm doing. To me, that's so essential because, you know, like you were saying, there's no playbook. I mean, there really isn't. And even if there was, it would be out of date because things are moving and changing so quickly. So we have to be resilient to that kind of change and embrace that uncertainty about the future. And the only way we're going to feel confident and know that we're making the right instincts is to follow our instincts and to really listen to that and to know that you're making the right decisions, regardless of whether it's small or large, that you can sleep at night kind of clarifying things and really just being with the people you're working with and really being with them. You know, it's about getting away from that desk and, you know, looking at the artwork. It's about, you know, calling someone versus writing an email. It's about, you know, sharing something that you learned that day that might help you connect with other people in different ways, and asking questions. I think that's the best way.
What about you, Christy? Because you have an MBA, and I feel like education's had a big role in your life, but also maybe there's things you've learned.
I find having an MBA is about reductive reasoning versus opening the aperture, which I think our industry is much more about opening the aperture. And I would even recommend things like, one thing I've learned on the job is that people can't adapt to change as quickly as you can imagine a long vision. You have a big idea, but the world's appetite for the big idea is very incremental. So figuring out ways that you can cast this long vision, but find ways to move people through the steps. And another thing is safe words for high risk. You know, I love to say things like, we're going to pilot this, or we're just going to throw some spaghetti on the wall and we're going to see what sticks and we're going to move with that. You know, and it's like, it's a safe way to say, we're going to take a lot of risks, but all of it's fine. You know, I do think it's great. I mean, you have to find ways to like soften something that, you know, people want you to take a risk, but then in the end, it's like, when it comes right down to it, you kind of have to have a little bit of some cushioning around it. So it's just one thing I think, you know, decades have taught me, that I love the big idea, but you have to be willing to take the small steps toward the big idea.
I think small steps, and one of the things I've learned, I think early on in my career, I was much more aggressive and hard. And in my later years, I'm much softer. Well, I'm sure my team won't say that, but I feel like I'm much softer.
Yeah.
And this is a great segue into my next question, which is, there are all these books and publications out there about women leaders in business, like Lean In and #GirlBoss. What advice would you give women who want to hold leadership positions in the art world today? Because I think there's actually not a lot of books on women leaders in the art world.
Good
Small
question.
steps is good.
I think you have to be open and able to approach others and be able to kind of speak your mind. Because I think that that's been something that I found to be really important, is that, you know, when it's important to try and convey what you're thinking and kind of like what you're feeling and the difficulties you're facing. Sometimes in this art world it's so opaque. Like when I had the gallery and I wasn't selling anything at all, I would go around to the other galleries in the Lower East Side and I'd be like, how are sales going? Because I want to shoot myself in the face. And you know, some of the galleries would be like, I'm had the best month, I'm doing great, I'm like killing it, blah blah. Jerry Stoltz just came in, blah blah blah, and I'm like, oh, okay, so it's just me. I'm like, and then I found one gallerist who was like, yes, this is a really like tough time, and I like really appreciated that honesty, and And I think that that's something that's so important, because then you can grow. And I think that the more kind of honesty and transparency that we have, the more that we will be able to grow together. And then also just don't be afraid of the sound of your own voice and your own opinions. I think as women, you know, you said that you were aggressive, and like I've been called aggressive too, you know, and it's
well,
kind
I
of
almost think that's a word they only use for women.
For women,
because
of
I've never
course.
heard men
Yeah.
being described as aggressive.
No.
It's just men.
Yeah.
But
Gotta go.
women are aggressive. I don't know what that means. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So if you're, you know, just be aware that we have these labels, whether we're like being aggressive or not. I think if you're honest and you speak your mind and you're open, then I think you'll get ahead.
Well, one of my questions, and I had all these questions, and I'm not asking all the questions. I'm going to ask 2 more questions. One of the questions I wanted to ask is, what does power mean to you? What is power?
Oh, that's an easy one.
That's easy for some.
I was obviously joking, but I don't know that there is a clear answer there. I think it's all about creating opportunity, not only for yourself, but for the people around you, for the businesses around you, for the artists around you, and it's all about creating more opportunities for everyone.
Oh, well, I want to answer your question about success.
Okay.
Don't you think they're nuanced, like
Okay.
power and
Yeah,
success?
So
I
my
think so.
final question, final question, which was on all the social media postings, are what is success, and what does success mean to you now, and what do you think it'll mean to women in the future?
So she sent these questions to us in advance, just so you all know. But it was really thoughtful, because I had a chance. My instinct was to say, you know, to have an impact, which is so lame. I, in a way, kind of thought about it. I have a Maslow's hierarchy of needs kind of response. And the first is, I'm a single mother, and financial viability is something that is at the lowest common denominator, and I don't think that anybody should be afraid to say that I needed to ensure that I could send my child to college. She's about to go to college, and I needed to ensure that I had a certain stability. And I think that you should all be very comfortable acknowledging that in your lives. That's my low end of the Maslow's. The second is the middle part, and it's about being true to my cornerstones. And this is about like those jobs that you have over your career. What is it that defines you? And so for me, some of it is about preservation. It's about the vibrancy of our city. It's about the cultivation of our artists and the ensuring that their voices are heard and advocating on their behalf. Those are my cornerstones. So it's like, I always like to go back to my cornerstones. And then my last one was, my highest part of the Maslow is about creation, to create things and to leave the world with these things. You leave the world a better place. I'm so proud that you're doing your residency, because you have decided to take a risk and to create something that will impact other people and will leave the world a better place. And that is that's like a very evolved thing to do. So that's my definition of success.
That's amazing, Christy. That's
That was
pretty
amazing. Brilliant.
Anyone else want to talk about success? Elizabeth?
That was genius. I completely stand behind that too. No, I mean I think that we're all kind of overlapping now, these questions and these answers. So it's good. I mean, I think that your life is lived in chapters and stages, and so what success was at age 25 is vastly different than it is now for me at 45. You have to realize that you want things to change, and you don't want it to be a straight line, and it's less interesting when it is like that. So, for me, if I can get up in the morning and feel the way an artist feels waking up in the morning going to the studio, I think I'm on the right track.
Great. Well, I want to thank all the panelists for your questions, and I want to open it up to questions from the floor, from the audience. So I think we have some microphones, so if you could just raise your hand if you have a question, we'll pass the mic around. Anybody have a question? In the back? Oh, right there. Okay. Good.
This is a question for Elizabeth, and I guess I'll just start where you just ended, saying that you wanted change. Is that part of the reason why you wanted to open up the gallery in Harlem, which some people might not consider a art mecca the way they do for Chelsea or the East Village? And I think I read this morning that your gallery may be moving, or
Yes,
maybe you're looking
yes,
for new space.
yes,
or
it is.
somewhere. So I'm just
Yeah.
curious what you're looking to now and what you see wanting change.
I've been a gallerist for 21 years. I wouldn't say I had the same business for 21 years. It had many different stages, depending on the kind of artist I was representing at that point, the neighborhood I was in, the generation that I kind of emerged with. And after 15 years in Chelsea, I had to make a change. And I felt that I wanted to really take on a different kind of curatorial challenge. And so I wasn't entirely definitive about what that would be. I think like all of us, we go around and we look at what's going on and what's available and the timetable that I was on, and there's practicalities involved. But I had moved to Harlem in 2013, so I was a part of that community. It was the first time I felt like I was part of a neighborhood community outside of Chelsea, which was significant for me. And I don't know that I ever really significantly gave it any thought as a place to also work, and including living, except that I got very interested in the cultural history of Harlem, and I was lucky enough to discover the original Studio Museum from 1968. And it was an abandoned structure that hadn't been occupied for many, many years. And so I think I like a challenge, and I wanted to be reinvigorated by the practice of the gallery. I've always been somewhat of a frustrated gallerist. That's, for me, has always been, it's a love-hate relationship I've had with that role. And I've always done other things in addition to being a gallerist. I had X Initiative, and now I have independent art fairs. So I've always done things to engage a community that helps satisfy what I thought were the missing links in the business of being a gallery, which I felt was somewhat limited. So I was always sort of itching to kind of expand that. When it was just a timing and an opportunity that I just couldn't pass up. I thought, this is going to be the chapter where the gallery has built something that people trust, but I can go further into territories that are unfamiliar to even my audience, and I want to reframe what the audience of a gallery needs to be. So, and a long story short, that's how I ended up uptown. We knew that development was a big part of how Harlem was changing. That was no surprise. When our building was sold about a year ago, we knew that the point was to be developing the building. But the timetable of that was not in my control. So we are going to be relocating. And where we go next, I think I have to take the same approach and say, what is it out there? What is the timetable? What is going to be the best thing for the artists? And then make a decision from there.
Thank you. Yes, your question. Yes.
Well, first, thank you. I was wondering what kind of advice you would have for someone. Sorry, I'm a little nervous, but I'm following your advice. And I'm speaking up. What advice you would have for someone who's actually totally new to art? I actually was following your Instagram, and I changed all my plans tonight, and I said, okay, I'm coming. So I pushed my dinner to later. And I'm actually in PR, but it's fashion. I travel between Montreal, Toronto, and New York. And I've been doing this for 18 years. I have 2 kids. But suddenly, I don't know, I have this really good friend who's an amazing artist. And I went to Mexico City, to Guadalajara. I saw what she did. I was like, wow, I would love to find a way to help her. I'm in PR, but I know nothing about art. And my New Year's resolution was, and my husband thought I was crazy, was I think I want to do an internship. And then he thought I was crazy. He's like, what are you talking about? You have no time. How are you going to do an internship? So anyways, to make a long story short, I came here and I've been listening to you and very, very inspired. So thank you. It's been amazing, and I'm so happy I changed my plans. But I was just wondering what advice you would have for someone who's in her 40s who wants to learn about her art, who has a very busy schedule. And I was thinking internship, but I'm, like I said, most people I know think I'm absolutely crazy. So I was just wondering what you would suggest.
Well, I think you're here, you've just spoken up, and you've been talking about an internship, and you obviously have a passion for the arts, so all of those things you're doing right. I think the thing is with growing within this art world and growing as a person, it takes time.
Of course.
There's not like a quick fix, or there's not like a manual, you know, like especially within this industry that changes all the time. So I think an internship is a great idea. I also think you can join different networking clubs that are also associated with different organizations, different museums. Start going to the galleries, because people aren't going to the galleries anymore. We want people to visit the galleries because that's one of the best places to see art. So I know you have limited amount of time, but if you can stay connected and make connections within this community, you will ultimately be rewarded.
And I want to add to what Helen's saying in terms of there's so many nonprofit organizations where you can be a docent or a volunteer. And of course, Sotheby's Institute offers online and summer courses, so you don't have to have the whole summer or the whole year and a half to do your master's degree if you want to just dabble and learn a little bit. But I think all of these ideas are really fantastic, and thank you so much for coming tonight. It's great.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your question. There's a question in the back.
Oh, I project. I don't know if you.
I think it's for the people on Facebook, if you don't mind.
Let me keep this far. Is it registered?
That's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here first and foremost, because the political climate in this country, it takes a lot of guts to stand here as women and represent all that you do. But I wanted to ask you, unlike what number 45 would want us to believe, men and women would both succeed if feminism succeeds in the professional workspace. And so my question for you is, what can us, your male counterparts, do for you to ensure that in the workplace we're both functioning at our most optimal and our most efficient together in a way that's not undermining you just because you are women? Because I feel like I've been witness to men now violently turning the other way, where instead of hushing women down, saying, okay, well, because you're a woman, I have to give you the podium, and that's still undermining women in a way. So what can we do for you to ensure that you feel like you are on the platform equally as an equal individual, and we're walking alongside each other on this journey?
I think that's a great question. I'll turn it to the panelists.
I would say it takes authentic and genuine interest and curiosity about what we have to say. I wouldn't want to be on a panel put there by a gentleman or be given a voice just because they think it's the politically correct thing to do. It shows. I think it is super important to be genuinely curious about the different voices that are out there, and this has to come from within. And certainly the current the current events are a moment of reckoning, and we're slowly coming to terms with all of this. But it has to be authentic, and we have to want to seek different opinions, and we have to want that. There's no other way. Yeah.
I look at it like there's sort of a systems aspect to that, and there's a content. And the systems are things like point out examples of place where the systems don't create balance. Gender, equity pay. Like if any of you are in a role and there's not equity in the pay scales, that should be corrected. That's that. It needs to become a very matter-of-fact thing. I love the fact that Hollywood is now adopting this, whatever it is where you're requesting that there be reasonable hiring of a diverse group of people. And it gets to the other part, which is the content. And I think it's true. The ultimate goal is that you're agnostic as to gender or race. It doesn't matter. I remember when gay marriage became legalized, and I was so excited, and my friend said, I don't want it to be called gay marriage, it's just marriage. And that's the point. I mean, I do think it's really about, we're here to contribute as best, regardless of whether we're female or male, and that's the ultimate goal. So I look at it like systems. We have to fix all the systems, and the content needs to be just a matter of respect.
One of the recent laws that was passed in New York State is you cannot ask somebody's salary history, which is a real attempt at getting to pay equity. So exactly as you're saying, Christy, it's really addressing sort of the sort of legal structures and sort of the, these things that are preventing equality and removing those obstacles.
I also think you vote with your feet. Choosing to work at certain organizations that have no women or minorities in roles of authority is a problem. And it's not only, if you're a woman, you're limiting your own role within that organization, and if you're a man, you're also limiting the support that your contribution could be making in an organization that's more diverse. And I always try and bring that up when I am, particularly with the fair, working with other companies. I always ask those questions once I'm starting to think about even hiring a service, or do you have women in roles of authority at the organization? If it seems like I'm only dealing with men and I don't understand why, or I'm only dealing with kind of a limited situation, and usually I try and make the choices as consciously as I can to work with organizations that have a real balance to them, and I think that can help too.
Great question. Yes, we have a question over here.
I have a question. I have a very broad question. So, what do you guys think about the current relationship between the non-profit side of the art world with the commercial side, and how it will be changed in the future, and what might be the contributor for changing? Thank you.
Well, I'll start because I used to work on the online art side many, many years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and there was a real distinction between commercial and non-commercial, and a real fear of blending commercial activities with non-commercial activities. And so when I started working at Artsy, when Artsy was just forming and it was still in beta, it was like 30 people when I joined Artsy, all the museums were very, very reluctant to put their images on a commercial platform. And so the whole discussion of what is commercial and what is non-commercial really has been broken down not only by Artsy, but also by Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, because when I pointed out the fact that if you go to Instagram and you hashtag Jeff Koons, you're going to get commercial works and non-commercial works all on the same platform. And that was a moment when I think those boundaries really started to melt away. And people started saying, look, of course we have our bylaws, we have to adhere to certain regulations as a nonprofit, but technology really made it impossible to say only educational users can view this content. It really made it impossible. So I think technology had a lot to do with breaking down those barriers, and I think it's going to be much more fluid as time goes on.
And it's changing a lot. I think galleries in some ways are acting like museums, and museums, as we've seen, in some ways are acting like commercial enterprises, particularly in this country. And so there's a little bit of a skewing going on in terms of the balance structure there that needs to be discussed and worked out. Even in the fair platform, museums are presenting work as exhibitors, and I think it's actually added something to the experience and the forum that fairs provide. And I think it's been great for their outreach to their patrons, and because it's the same, we're all sharing in some ways the same community. but I think we're seeing more of that, maybe more in Asia, more of this blur, even than here. And then in Europe, it's still a little bit further back, saying, hey, this is a little bit too close for comfort. Let's keep these things as separate as we can, for as long as we can. And we have some true, issues around getting things too closely aligned. So between the private space and the public space. So I think it's situational right now. It's territorial also.
Well, thank you all for joining. I want to thank all of our panelists.
There's actually one more question that came online, if we can just ask it.
Oh, okay. Wow. Well, all right then.
As someone who has just entered the gallery world, I'm reminded every day that building and maintaining relationships and trust are crucial in running a successful art business. What have you ladies found to be the most efficient way of building strong relationships with diverse groups of people in the art world, from artists and collectors to other art professionals?
I would just go back to honesty and integrity and helping and all growing together. I think that's the easiest thing to sort of live by.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, I also think it's really following through on your word. I mean, if you say you're going to deliver something, contract, show, an exhibit, you're going to send a brochure or whatever, just follow through. I think increasingly I find just, showing up at the appointed time, I mean, that almost doesn't happen anymore. People are just like, oh, I'm running late, I'm texting you, it's really kind of being reliable and having the trust of whoever you're working with, and that's really important.
I think it's also contributing back to your community. It's the same thing. When at the Rauschenberg Foundation, we turned Robert Rauschenberg's home. It was about 20 acres, and he had about 12 homes, and we turned it into a residency. And that contributed to the culture of the artists. And over time, I think the time I was there, I think we had several hundred artists who had gone through. And by virtue of creating that, you've created a network of people who have benefited from that. And we tried to, I always think you have to also have a very open spirit about things. How can we contribute back to this group? How could they be better connected? How could we enhance their time now that they're alumni of it? And if you're constantly giving back to them, it's like your own chickens that have gone out into the world. And that it's like being a teacher and your students go into the world and you suddenly have a population. So I think of jobs as that same opportunity. You have the same challenge or opportunity to contribute back to the culture, and always think about how can you give back to that group, and they become your chickens out in the world. That's
a great note to end on. So thank you all. Thank you for